Hello and welcome to entrepreneurcircle.world, your home to learn the circular economy, meet other entrepreneurs, and grow your ideas. Our inspiring interview guest is not only today's guest, he's our very first interview. He does not need an introduction, as he is a living legend for all of us, the circular economy proponents. He's a co-founder and director of the Product Life Institute in Geneva, a consultancy devoted to developing sustainable strategies and policies. He first came to fame for his prize-winning paper, The Product Life Factor, in 1982. Now, 40 years later, he continues to publish, and his ideas are more alive than ever. You might have guessed, I'm honored to introduce Professor Stahel. Welcome.
Good morning, Gordana. So, yes, what would you like to know?
Oh, many things. I and our members would like to know many things from you. So I'll start with the very first question, because hearing from you as the father of the circular economy, what first motivated you, as I said a moment ago, over 40 years ago, to question how we use our resources?
Well, by training, I'm an architect. And so I know that renovating buildings takes more time and also gets a higher fee than building from scratch. In 1973, I started as a researcher at the Stahel Institute in Geneva, then the leading contract research organization in Europe. 1973 was also the year of the oil price shock. Oil prices tripled worldwide for political reasons, and at the same time, Europe had high unemployment, especially of young people. So, not being an economist, for me, the solution was obvious: to substitute manpower for energy, to use more labor and less energy. But this is the reverse of mechanization, the reverse of how the economy has developed. Because we have always replaced machines, people for machines. So the problem was to find a sponsor for such a project, because all economists told me that I cannot go against the grain of time. I finally found the director of DG for Social Affairs in Brussels to finance a study on the potential for substituting manpower for energy. The conclusion of the study was the definition of an economy in loops, what today is called circular economy, for physical goods. Such we studied cars and buildings.
Interesting that the European Commission back then already involved, and yet it's now the last 10 years that really is pushing us in this direction. But we'll come to that a little bit later. I will ask this question towards the end one more time. So you held really divergent views for over 2 generations about how our whole economic system should work. Just like you mentioned, you went against the grain, and that is not easy. So that must have required courage and persistence. How often were you told along this path that you were wrong, and what kept you going?
The difference between stubbornness and perseverance is success. One has to believe in one's ideas and hope to succeed, with the risk of ending up as a fool. So most economists, including those at Stahel, were convinced this study would ruin Stahle's reputation. Only a layman who knew nothing about economics could propose such a folly. So for 20 years, I survived financially by accepting positions in management and consulting, by writing papers, taking part in competitions. So I got a prize for a paper on the product life in the States and on unemployment in Germany in the 1987. We finally got the first contract from Ministry of the Environment, not a Ministry of Economics in Germany. So one of the tricks in consulting and research is always to find the client who is interesting to know about what you are doing, never mind if it's the right or the wrong ministry.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Who was the Minister of Environment back then in Germany?
It was actually the Ministry of the Environment in Baden-Württemberg, Stuttgart.
Oh, okay, interesting. And that doesn't matter where you obviously convinced, and this is a big prize considering that Stuttgart is the car city. So that that must have been a big honor. Yeah, it's incredible. Your view of resource flow has now found a much wider audience around the whole world, and we are finally on the way to the circular path. And this transition offers great opportunities for entrepreneurs. So what are your recommendations for entrepreneurs who are starting their own enterprise?
Well, the circular economy, normally people talk about materials, but it's actually about economics, innovation, and competitiveness.
Yes.
And the objective is to maintain the value and utility of stocks of objects, not flows as in manufacturing. And secondly, maintaining the value and purity of stocks of atoms and molecules, not recycling.
Mm-hmm.
So cleaning up and recycling are the last phase of the linear industrial economy. They are necessary to deal with the legacy of the Anthropocene, but they are not part of the circular economy proper. Mm-hmm. They are, especially waste management, is driven by cost minimization, not value preservation. Mm-hmm. So startup entrepreneurs have a wide choice between innovative activities in the area of R, which is reuse, repair, remanufacturing, refill, reprogram, all the R's.
Recover, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Then the other area of innovation is the area of D for delinking materials, depolymerization, dealloying, deconstructing buildings. But that is more a technology than the area of R is more local and labor intensive. Mm-hmm. The third opportunity is developing circular sciences in chemistry, reusable monomers, in energy, geothermic, hydrogen, micronuclear, and metallurgy, new types of selective scrap collection and separation. This needs considerable input of research money and is really not open for, I think, for SMEs. Mm-hmm. The performance economy is the fourth opportunity, selling the use or function of objects instead of selling the objects themselves. This option is the most profitable one, but has a high entrance price. Witness Elon Musk's SpaceX or Philips selling light as a service. In the performance economy, redesign in the sense of systems design, technically and commercially, becomes a skill to succeed, but demands time, investments, which startups typically do not have.
That is true. That is so true. There is, yeah, we'll come to the question about investors in a moment. A lot is required in this direction, but huge opportunities, as you just listed. And of course, there are huge opportunities for companies. So for those who already have a business or are working for a company, how can they push for the circular change? And which narrative would you recommend for these change makers?
Courage, because being first is the best strategy. Mm-hmm. But being first means you cannot follow the footsteps of someone else. And success may not be instant. Think of my first research in 1976. Xerox is a key example for a global company selling customer satisfaction instead of photocopiers since the 1990s. Mm-hmm. Even older examples are hotels and taxi drivers selling the performance of their services. You will find 300 case studies in my 2010 books, The Performance Economy, because it's much wider. Performance economy is much wider than physical goods. It also includes pharmaceuticals, for example.
I highly recommend that book. I highly recommend that. And now the investors, because all of this won't happen without the investment. And the first conversations that I had with investors revealed a lot of confusion in there. Many, even today, don't fully understand the circular economy and might be reluctant to invest in circular economy companies and projects, sometimes even because of the cash flow issues, old models, old risk perceptions. There are many reasons behind. What do you recommend to investors when they're considering investing in a circular economy?
Well, in the area of R, the problem is there is no economy of scale. And normally investors want to see how you are going to apply economy of scale. Repairing anything, it's one job after the other, and you cannot have economy of scale. This you have to explain to investors. Mm-hmm. I, at some point, was working for the chief worldwide leading company in rail grinding, and we had a big discussion with investing bank. And when they heard that we actually charge 5 cents per meter of ground rail, they said, but this is, this is a detailed business. We are looking at big business. So when I asked them how many kilometers of railways there are, which we ground every year, they had no clue. I said, well, it's 120 million kilometers at 5 cents per meter. And they suddenly realized this was a huge business. But people don't understand the circular economy and remanufacturing, for example. Investing in products as a service business model of the performance economy needs a long time perspective, which also is very often not given. Success may not show up in quarterly results for some time, and it involves risks in liability and technology changes, which demands an inclusion of broad risk management and component standardization know-how. So that means that the long-term interest applies mainly to insurance and reinsurance companies, as well as family-held banks, rather than the quick buck organizations or managers aiming for maximum annual bonuses in banks.
Yeah. That is correct, because at the long term, I had a series of interviews with investors from Europe and here China and Singapore, and they also, majority of them also expressed this, what you said, the term long-term thinking, that the investment industry is lacking long-term thinking, and that we need more of that. They're exactly the same. Now one more thing. When we look at how products are made, you mentioned this remanufacturing and all this. How we make products and how that we change, redesign, remanufacture, recover, and so on is one part. In our work, actually, in the Middle East and Southeast Asia, I identified 4 elements that I personally believe are important for the circular economy. And these are infrastructure, education, and the mindset. And the infrastructure is one of these elements that is kind of in the middle because nobody feels responsible for it. Yet companies are, due to extended producer responsibility or reverse logistics or whatever, companies will increasingly be required to get their products back, or at least the materials. How are they going to do if there is no proper infrastructure? And we see when we look closer in some areas that is the case. What is your recommendation in building up the connections?
Well, the circular economy, especially the area of R, is very much influenced by cultural factors, and these differ locally or regionally. It's also very skill intensive, labor and skill intensive. So education and behavioral sciences, behavioral by users, by customers, is very important. Changing people's preference from consumer to user, and in textiles or cars from fashion to function, is a big challenge. In the business to customer activities of the performance economy, caring becomes key for the economic, environmental, social sustainability of the activity. The behavior has been shown to be crucial, for example, with e-scooters, because many of these companies have failed because people treat an e-scooter differently if they own it or if they just use it. But with your question to the infrastructure, the question is really take back or bring back solutions. Deposit laws, for example, may be a precondition for bring back solutions, such as drink containers, and legislation forcing take back by any shop selling similar objects, such as the WEEE, the waste of electric and electromechanical equipment, where the shops have to take for free, have to take these things back. But it's the take back or bring back basically has to face the option that discarded products for many people have no positive value, and there is nobody liable for it. So policymakers can either give them a value, such as a deposit, or they can name a responsible owner, and that would normally be the manufacturer. But introducing a full producer liability of manufacturers for their products is something that is fought by industry and not very popular with policymakers either, because they basically may lose control, but it will completely change the way products are brought to market.
That is so true what you say. This is unfortunately also the reason we don't see value in this current product, that we threw out 22 billion just worth of gold in 1 year, because these are in our electronic appliances. So we have to also see the value in these products again. We have to discover that there is so much hidden gems in this. And I think we have to educate the young people. I'm doing my part here in Shenzhen, China, with my students. What is the role of education in your experience? And should circular economy be part of the curriculum? If yes, where, and how early should we start teaching the circular economy?
Well, circular economy principles can be promoted through the family, for example, heritage objects, through group pressure. The Amish in the USA are a typical example, or education. But in the latter case of education, it should start in a playful way, even in kindergarten, in learning by doing in primary schools. And that, of course, means that the adults should be walking the talk. They should not tell people what to do and do something else, because that's not very convincing for kids. The person who translated my book, Circular Economy for Beginners, into Swedish is a primary school teacher convinced that teachers and pupils have to and can understand and internalize the thoughts of a circular economy.
Yeah, it is a very good idea, because we have to go back to understanding the concept of life, understanding the value of life, that everything we use had a life. If we use a table, it was a tree. If we use something else, I mean, you're an architect, you know these things even way better than I do. As an economist, we have to value life, and we have so many children growing up believing that food grows in a supermarket. It doesn't. This is one of the challenges.
Yeah, and electricity comes out of a socket outlet.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly the point, Walter. That's exactly. We have so much to learn. And one of the Ellen MacArthur promotes this concept more than you do. I'm aware of this, that the circular economy should mimic nature, or come closer, way closer to nature, because in nature there is no waste. And if we go closer to nature, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There is so much wisdom and knowledge in when we look back in historical records, because the ancient cultures, indigenous, pre-colonial, they were closer to nature per necessity. There was no industrial economy back then. And there is so much wisdom. How can we ideally, I mean, I live in a country that has such a long history. How can we connect the old wisdom with the technology, with today's technology? What would be, your observation?
Well, we have to distinguish between different forms of circularity that exist in parallel in nature, in society, and in the economy. The circular economy, in my opinion, cannot mimic nature, because nature progresses by evolution, not by design. It has no plan, it has no liability, no taxes. It knows no waste, because resources are food for others, but this is not the case for modern materials. Therefore, I do disagree with the assumption of mimicry. Nature's circularity is limited by its absorption and regeneration capacities. And there we are also violating very often these principles. Farmers can be caretakers or exploiters of natural assets, but again, education or taxes can pull them one way or the other. Economy of scale measures often lead to soil compression, big tractors, erosion if you level out fields, loss of biodiversity if you get rid of hedgerows, pollution through fertilizers, increased water consumption. In all these cases, education and motivation of caring are key to change industrial agriculture. The wisdom, now to come back to your question, the wisdom found in pre-colonial indigenous cultures is the basis of many circular societies, which are typically of non-monetary nature and are as old as humankind. Their common denominator is a caring attitude for assets, natural, forests, cultural, museums, human power, education, and health. Examples of circular societies in Europe are repair cafes, food banks, which unfortunately at the moment are becoming very relevant for survival of many people, barter shops for children's clothes and toys where people exchange goods without money, as well as social enterprises repairing derelict objects for reuse by disadvantaged social groups. But these social activities are based on volunteers, on local cultural values, and they vary between regions and cannot be applied to all cases or all people. Circular economies, which is monetary, include some of the oldest crafts active in both repairing and manufacturing small quantities of objects locally, such as shoemakers, violin makers, plumbers, masons, electricians. And these crafts are best taught by learning by doing. In other words, apprenticeship systems that are common in German-speaking part of Europe, but not so much in other countries, because teaching a plumber or a violin maker in an academic course normally is not very successful, because you actually have to experience what you are doing, and it will often end up in failures, but you will learn more from failures than from successes. Specialized repair trades for immobile and mobile objects, such as car mechanics and operation maintenance specialists for machinery, think of lifts and steam boilers, are appropriate also for modern technologies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Walter, you're raising a very interesting point. It just occurred to me because just finished a paper that referred to exactly this, the craftsmanship, the apprenticeship, and all this. And with us, of course, moving through new laws and regulations, moving more towards repair. This question is linked with the previous question of education. Do we actually have enough apprentice candidates? Because Germany, for example, is already facing a shortage of labor, because a lot of young people don't want to go into apprenticeship. There are cool directions like IT or better paid jobs. So just briefly with education and apprenticeship, what are your observations?
Well, the problem is the image that many of these manual professions have. In England, there was a saying that the difference between engineers and scientists is that engineers wash their hands before they go to the toilet. Scientists wash their hands once they have been at the toilet. So manual work is a dirty business. And of course, everybody would prefer today to do games or Bitcoin or whatever, rather than to repair a toilet. But history does not repeat itself. Patterns remain. The first report in 1976 was based on electromechanical objects, because electronics simply didn't exist in those days. So for the last 40 years, I've spent time lecturing on all continents, but writing articles and books. But I never tried to break down concrete walls, built by established powers to protect their market shares. The strategy I used was to identify pioneers and teams that were working in the domain I was interested in, and then team up with them. In the late 1980s, those pioneers were in Europe. And then in the 1990s in the USA, in the end of the 1990s and early 21st century, they moved to Asia. So it's very strange how one continent is a leader in, or was a leader in the circular economy, but then 10 years later was no longer interested in it. For a long time, I've been traveling salesman on the circular economy, but at the same time making a living as research director of risk management in a think tank of the world's biggest insurers. So my lesson on implementing circular economy is that I, and probably most of us active in those days, underestimated the inertia in economy and politics. Maynard Keynes once said that ideas will only change the world when his students will become managers and politicians, and he was right. But changing the mindset of the majority of people in power instantly is near impossible. Actually, Maynard Keynes also said that in the long term we are all dead, so he didn't believe in the long term. Now the problem with young people is that they are young. When I wrote my 1976 report to the Commission of the European Communities, I was 30 years old, an age when youngsters lack experience. You will see when you are older why this doesn't work. Today, this has changed, and this is a very important thing. In the digital world, 90-year-old kids are often pre-retired billionaires. Yeah. So we live in a different world today. Think of Elon Musk, was one of the developers of PayPal. After selling his shares in PayPal, he invested his fortune in Tesla. And 10 years ago, he sold half his Tesla shares and invested it in SpaceX. Similar stories exist in the People's Republic of China, but are unknown in modern Europe. First of all, we are forgetting that the industrial success of Europe was built on entrepreneurs like Marconi, Edison, Tesla. Of course, not only in Europe. In Europe, it was Siemens and Brown Boveri, Benz and Diesel, to name but a few. But times have changed. And today, failure is no longer accepted in business in Europe. And the availability of risk capital and the absence of risk aversion still make out a large part of national competitiveness. So today, nation states and corporations should put their efforts on circular sciences, because circular sciences will end if they are successful in patents, and patents can be developed locally anywhere in the world, but licensed globally. So then you have economy of scale without globalization in the physical sense. On a governance level, my message today is global. We live in a disruptive moment in time as society is faced with several societal changes. The first one, I think people are now aware, halting anthropogenic climate change. which is hindered by a political tradition of cheap energy and the resistance of people to accept price rises justified by global needs. Just watch what is happening in Europe, especially with the price rise in gas and petrol prices that are beneficial for climate change, but now are fought with subsidies in Europe because people, otherwise we have a revolution. Then the second point is shifting to a circular economy to prevent waste and pollution, which also continues to be hindered by public end-of-pipe policies focused on waste management and recycling. And thirdly, we need to stop the exponential growth of anthropogenic mass, which in 2020 equaled the global natural biomass of 1.1 teratons. Anthropogenic mass has recently doubled every 20 years and will soon exceed the entire global living biomass if unchecked. But biomass means biodiversity, it means many things, and the circular economy is the only solution I know that can respond to all three challenges by creating a low carbon, low waste, and low anthropogenic mass society, by making use of embodied resources, applying loss and waste prevention through intelligent resource and risk management, and give preference to reusing existing stocks of infrastructure, building, equipment, materials, completed by innovation into circular green, electricity, chemistry, metallurgy, to overcome the problems caused by the first anthropogene. Now, the key justification and motivation for rapid shift to a circular economy is that it has to be combined with disruptive innovation, and it is the only strategy of simultaneously fighting the three challenges. We have to achieve a low carbon, low waste, and low anthropogenic mass society. But now let's be very careful. The politicians always talk about going back to the values of 1990 in industrialized countries. This is wrong, because less developed countries still need to build infrastructure, hospitals, airports, harbors, and for that they need to heavily invest materials, and that creates CO2 emissions. So the industrialized countries that live in society of abundance actually have to go back to emission levels of 1950. Mm-hmm. In other words, if they go back to zero to 1990, we shall never go back to zero emissions. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So at that global understanding in policymaking that industrialized countries have profited for a long time from industrialization, but now they must give way to other companies getting industrialized, is a key element in that is lacking in today's discussion, political global discussions.
Yeah, Walter, that is so true. We see this in the way how we comment or how we look at China's. But this country had to invest into huge infrastructure projects in order to produce for us as well. as a factory of the world, but we don't see that because we just see the part of, and the country is of course aware that we have to move. You have been active here as well. Your books were translated into Chinese, and you have a great legacy in China as well. Yeah.
The first time that I worked in China was actually in 1995 in Taiwan with the Industrial Designer Society of China. And then 10 years later, at a conference at the Dongji University in Shanghai on sustainability. And that was a great event that really spread the word. We were 25 experts from all over the world. And I was amazed how quickly the Chinese academics and industry and policymakers understood the circular economy and how to use it in their policy making. So, for example, People's Republic of China is the only country I'm aware of that has remanufacturing for the last 10 years as one of their 5 pillars in industrial strategy. And it's amazing that the countries like Germany are still fighting remanufacturing because it will jeopardize their production volumes.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. Walter, I could listen to you for hours because you have so much wisdom and so much experience in circular economy. And we all have been profiting from that through your books, articles, your speeches. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your persistence and hard work. And of course, the inspiration to me and so many others around the world, including here in China.
Gordana, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk with you about these topics.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
All the best.
Thank you. Same to you.